I'm going to talk a little bit about propertarianism and more specifically Curt Doolittle in the context of the current urgent requirements that some kind of action be taken to correct our situation. First of all, I want to make it clear that I recognize Curt Doolittle is more intelligent than I am. He's got a higher IQ, as does, for example, Chris Langan. Chris Langan has a virtually unmeasurable IQ. I suspect that may be the case. I don't know that to be the case with Curt Doolittle. My position with regard to my relative intelligence to these people is that I nevertheless have responsibility over my own actions. I'm not going to do what they tell me to do just because they have higher IQs or are more demonstrably intelligent, particularly in areas where I might not necessarily believe that to be very important. In my own case, I think things that affect my own life are obviously very important, but there are things that I believe beyond that to be important. And there are lots of intelligent people out there, people who are more intelligent than I am, who I would kill in an instant, given the opportunity. And this is because of the fact that I have agency. My agency may not be informed by the greater intelligence that these people have, but that isn't everything to an individual. Their IQ, their intelligence, etc. It's very important, obviously. More important is their integrity. If they have integrity, that means that their entire being, from their mental abstractions through their biological nature, are integrated. And in that respect, they enjoy a greater consilience with larger reality. Having said all that, here's what it comes down to with Curt Doolittle and I. In my opinion, Curt is not dealing properly with sovereignty. The Treaty of Westphalia established the nation-state as sovereign. What that meant was that nation-states would retain the power, the war power, to declare war and initiate aggression, just as individuals in a state of nature have that sovereign individual power to initiate aggression. What Curt is attempting to do with the Propertarian Constitution is establish a state, a nation-state, within which force can be adjudicated and applied to maintain control of the citizenry, getting rid of parasitism, at least that's the intent. A nation-state is different. A nation-state does not automatically subject itself to various rules or regulations of other nation-states. This is true of any sovereign, any true sovereign. What he's dealing with is a level that's one below that of the Treaty of Westphalia. The Treaty of Westphalia says that the various nation-states, each of which has their own relationship to their people and to their God, and believe me, this is a religious matter, they retain the sovereign right to engage in actions independent of the other nation-states, perhaps bound by treaties, but treaties have to be recognized as an imposition on sovereignty, and they can be broken by sovereigns. So we as individuals enter into treaties with other individuals to form nation-states. And those nation-states then have relationships with each other, exercising our ultimate sovereignty as individuals in relationship to nature, from which we derive. Sortocracy establishes an understanding between nation-states. It is a understanding about what constitutes a violation of the standard of nation-state sovereignty. This is a very simple set of rules that are objectively determined by observation. Either someone is being kept as a prisoner and not being permitted to emigrate to another place, in other words, being exiled, or they are not being so kept. Another condition of being a legitimate nation state under Sortocracy is that the individual is recognized as having a primary relationship to territory. This goes back to nature, where an individual can engage in aggression against another individual as a selection process. Therefore, an individual has consent from a nation or from a government only if that individual can leave and go to another government that accepts that individual accepts that government, and take with them territorial rights or territorial value. This is something that was a failure of the U.S. Constitution because it did not automatically provide for the reallocation of territory based upon people voting with their feet. In the situation with the Treaty of Westphalia, if they had provided that, then there would have been less of a tendency for the United States government, when it was formed, to fail in this regard. And right now you have people fleeing, for example, from California without California being deprived of territory. Furthermore, when you admit people into a territory from outside of the regime of the nation states, they have to bring with them territorial value in order to be admitted. That's true under Sortocracy. These simple rules can be argued over. And the degree to which they could be argued over is much less than the degree to which the far more complex rules of the Propertarian Constitution could be argued over. That's not to say that the Propertarian Constitution is wrong. It's just to say that when we are engaging in preparations for war, which is what we are doing, you have to have a very simple, plausible promise. This is something that is a principle of insurgencies that John Robb talks about in Brave New War, the book. The idea of a plausible promise has to be simple enough that everybody could rally around it and then engage in open source warfare to take down the current regime and put in its place that very simple promise. If that promise is not simple, then the insurgency will be forked, just as an open source system could be forked, and then you lose the power of the insurgency. The idea of an argument service has been established by Nick Szabo with regard to, say, Bitcoin, where you have a very simple set of rules and very minimal governance, so-called. In fact, preferably no governance, ultimately, in establishing the legitimacy of Bitcoin's transactions and the limit on the supply. The argument service is analogous to the attack service of a computer system or any information system by crackers or hackers. The vulnerabilities are increased the more complex the system is. In establishing a state of war and trying to get a cohesive and functional war machine going, even if it's an insurgency, fourth generation warfare, you really need to make sure that the core idea is very simply stated so that the termination of that state of war, where people can regain their individual sovereignty and form consenting polities and consenting nation states, is very clearly delineated so that there's no perpetual war and hence loss of individual sovereignty or ultimately individual consent in forming various polities. So, I don't have an argument with propertarianism or Curt Doolittle except in the following sense. There is a need for a deeper foundation for any kind of constitution. And that deeper foundation has to be a recognition that sovereignty derives from individuals' right to territory as a natural right that precedes anything else. And once you have that, so that people can vote with their feet and reallocate territory between nation states. And those nation states retain ultimate power to make or break treaties. Only then do you have a foundation upon which you can build a constitution. And that constitution engage in the use of group force under adjudication. In other words, a civilized relationship between citizens and their government. Only then can you have something that is going to be legitimate and stable. And by legitimate, I mean ultimately recognizing that people have a relationship to nature from which they derive.